Gary Patterson may be finally returning to coaching full time, and his new destination would make perfect sense. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On Horned Frogs. Play my music.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? I'm Darrion Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, host of the Locked On Horned Frogs podcast, the #1 daily one-stop shop for everything TCU athletics, Monday through Friday, also part of the #1 sports podcast network in the country, Locked On. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. We close out today with a little bit of a prelude. We're not quite getting to that story yet, but it may be time to start looking at the hot seat for Jamie Dixon, especially if he loses tonight versus Oklahoma State. Speaking of losses to an OSU, TCU women's basketball team suffered a heartbreaker to Ohio State, but this whole thing kicks off with something that's probably joyous for a large part of the TCU community, and that's that Gary Patterson may be returning to coaching. I didn't think that this would ever happen, but if it did happen, I think that USC is a perfect place for him, and he is interviewing for their defensive coordinator position. I know you may be thinking immediately, why does USC make sense for Gary Patterson? That doesn't seem like a school that just stands out. And the truth of it is, it's not about the school. It's about Lincoln Riley. And Lincoln Riley's presence at USC is the reason that this makes some of the most sense in the world. If I had to leave a program that I built from the ground up this century, I am the face of TCU. I understand that the Frogs got to a national championship, but when people think about TCU, Gary Patterson is the face of the program because of what he did, how far he brought the school, going from a G5 to a Power 4 conference, right? At that time, obviously, it was a Power 5 conference and whatnot, but you're looking at a guy who saw and led and orchestrated the ascension of Texas Christian University football. So yes, people are going to think about Gary Patterson, and he did that for 2 decades. If I did all of that for a program and then I had to leave for whatever reason, I think it'd be pretty difficult for me to get back into coaching. That's the reason I didn't think that we would see it, especially seeing that he didn't bounce right back. Because what do you do next? I've been a program leader for 20 years. Do I go be an a defensive coordinator? That feels a little like it's like, I don't know. Maybe he had to take those years off. Maybe he had to go do some consulting for a Texas, for a Baylor. Maybe he had to do that because that's the only thing he felt comfortable with at that moment. But now it seems like Patterson is comfortable stepping into a full-time coaching role, and that role may be as the leader of USC's defense. Ironically, TCU's last opponent in the Alamo Bowl, but you're looking at a Gary Patterson and a Lincoln Riley relationship that really goes back for over a decade. I don't know what type of conversations they have on the spare time. I don't know if they're going to play golf together, but Lincoln Riley was at Oklahoma for years at the same time that Gary Patterson was there. So Riley was obviously the head coach from 2017 to 2021 at Oklahoma. But before that, he was also a part of the staff as an assistant coach, right? He was also on the offensive coordinator side of things. And when I look at the relationship between competitors, a lot of times it's built on a healthy level of respect. Unless it's just absolute hatred, even rivalries tend to be built on some level of respect, or at least have respect there. We've gone to battle so many times, we may not like each other, but I know you're great at your job. And for Lincoln Riley, he did battle against Gary Patterson for nearly a decade, if you include the things he did before becoming the head coach. So that is someone who knows who knows Patterson very well, very familiar as you can be with someone you didn't work with. And to me, that familiarity is the reason USC is a perfect destination for him. Because if I had to leave being a head coach at one place for 20 plus years, and I had to find somewhere else to go after a 4-year hiatus, I would try to cling on to whatever type of familiarity I could find. Hopefully that familiarity is also paired with stability, and I believe that it is for Lincoln Riley. Riley, I believe, is pretty safe at USC. I don't think he's going anywhere. I haven't heard any rumblings that people are putting him on the hot seat. I haven't heard any of that. So you have a coach who you're going to get a couple of years with. Then you have a guy who you know from the time that you spent in the Big 12 together. And let me tell you how much that Riley seems to hold, or how high Riley seems to hold Patterson. So when Patterson left TCU, obviously he was fired in the middle of the year. That was not something that Lincoln Riley could get down with. But when Patterson was let go, Riley said he was sick. He said that made him sick. He also said that it ain't right. He also talked about the idea of, cutting coaches in the middle of the year. So maybe the part about it not being right has to do with the mid-year and less about the fact that he got released or got fired. But still, there is a reverence that this is how you're supposed to treat this guy. Well, that sounds like somebody I want to work with. Someone who advocated for me at a time like that. That's somebody I'd want to work with. That sounds like someone who has the respect, right? So whether it's because of how the firing happened, the fact that the firing happened at all, there is clearly a level of respect that I can only assume comes from just being, in the same circles as a coach, how you would want to be treated, but also because of the mind. I would be interested to see how the philosophy of Patterson translates, because you've been off for 4 years. I don't know how that impacts how you approach the game. That's probably part of the interview process, to be honest. But I would be interested to see if they decide to go that route. If they decide to go with Gary Patterson, does he bring in new tweaks? Has he been sitting here and studying the game for the 4 years he's been gone? Like I said, he did some consulting with Baylor for a matter of months. He did some consulting with Texas for a season. So he's been around football. He's been on the Locked On Podcast Network, right? So with our guy Drake Toll. So he has been around football. He's been around media. I know he hasn't just been sitting back in his vacation home with a drink in hand, just chilling, not paying attention to the game. So he is probably still very well knowledgeable, or he's probably very knowledgeable about what's going on, but putting it into practice could be a little bit different. That's something to discuss. But outside of that, you probably already know his philosophy. It's probably not that much to really say or really talk about. I've played against you for years after years after years after years. I know how you're going to operate. I know what type of leader you are, because they're on offensive and defensive sides. They're actually competing against each other. I've tried to beat Patterson's defense. He's tried to beat my offense. So you're looking at a situation where, what more do I really need to know other than, now that you've been gone for 4 years, what kind of twists, what kind of turns do you plan on putting on your defense? Because if you come in with that defense that we know you to have, a legendary defense, legendary mind, things will be okay. We just need to make sure that the game hasn't passed you. Lincoln Riley may not be a defensive genius, but he probably knows, all right, these are some of the things that give me fits. We need to see if you're able to adapt with the times. This is what my offense does. How would you stop that, right? Just these things that are part of the conversation. And from the from the Los Angeles Times article that I read, it seems like a deal is not far-fetched. I've already painted how he is a logical candidate, but it also sounds like he's a likely candidate. So, and obviously I think the idea that he's just a defensive mind is why he's appealing to USC. I don't think we need to really get into that. You need a defensive coordinator. You're going to get this guy. Also speaks a lot, because I don't remember hearing Patterson in anything else for real. It speaks volumes. It speaks volumes that Lincoln Riley wanted to go get a Gary Patterson that has been on the couch for years to be his defensive coordinator. That speaks volumes about what kind of mind that Patterson was, and the respect that Lincoln Riley holds for Patterson. Anyway, the Los Angeles Times article I read said that Patterson is a leading candidate. I emphasize a, because if it was the leading candidate, that would sound like, oh man, a deal might be done by the time you hear this, right? Like, you're not going to hear it as soon as I say it, but you might catch me the next morning or something, and you already see that Gary Patterson has been signed. But a leading candidate sounds like there's multiple front runners, multiple guys in the pack. There's a group of 3-4 people who it could be anybody. So I would say a leading candidate sounds like he's on the short list. The leading candidate sounds like he's the front runner. But either one of those sounds like there could be a done deal within a matter of days. It shouldn't shock anybody. So I'll be watching and monitoring to see if he comes in. But also, this just tells me that maybe he's thinking about returning to football in general. Is it just the USC thing? We'll have to wait and see. But the next defensive coordinator that comes open, would it be shocking? Would it be shocking to see Gary Patterson go be a defensive coordinator at Iowa or something, right? Like now that he's getting into these conversations of jobs, I think that the door is open for him to go anywhere. I just think that USC makes a lot of sense because of familiarity, but he could go anywhere, especially with the track record that he has. I don't know. It just feels more and more for like the first time since 2021, we're going to have the return of Gary Patterson. That's just what it feels like to me. Let's move forward and get into some women's basketball because unfortunately that was a very joyous thing. I think, people love Gary Patterson. So seeing him get back on the sidelines and not in a capacity that's going to rival TCU is probably a good thing. Watching how the Ohio State game unfolded for TCU women's basketball, not so much. Let's get into that as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. And if you want to go to Gary Patterson's first game as defensive coordinator of USC, Game Time. You're going to have to find a plane ticket. You ain't going to find that on Game Time. But if you want to be front row in the Coliseum, you can be there using Game Time. Maybe you're a little less dramatic than that. And you want to just go to the next TCU men's basketball game or TCU women's basketball game. You can still find it on Game Time. That's not a problem. You don't have to fly out to California or wherever they're going to play in the first game, to be going cross country. You can go across the city. You can go to an event in Dallas. You can go to the American Airlines Center. If you're in Fort Worth, go to Dallas. You're in Dallas, come on to Fort Worth. If you just want to find something in your region, maybe you're not in Dallas or Fort Worth. I'm not in either one of those cities. I just want to find something close to me. Game Time allows that too. Anytime I want to go to a sporting event, which is my cup of tea, I'm always present. I saw some close tickets in like the 100 section for a Mavericks game at just less than $100. And these deals go all the way until game time. This is not a play on words. You can get them until an hour after tip-off. So go ahead and go to Game Time, download the account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you making this your first listen of the day every day. Make sure you're joining the Everydayer Club. There is a TCU men's basketball game tonight, and I want to make sure that this feels like not just the spot to go talk about what's going on with TCU. We can live talk about the game. I want to talk about things that are coming up. I want you to feel like you're a part of the show. So I would love to bring conversations from that Everydayer Discord to the show. Give shout outs, give screenshots, give comments. So make sure you watch your mouth. Do not use profanity. That will not show up on the show. But I think that would be a great time. So it's just $5 a month. $50 if you want to go with an annual buy, and that actually saves you $10 a year. So yeah, go ahead and go to the Discord, lockedonhornfrogs.supercast.com. That is the Discord. Now, as we continue pushing, as we continue rolling, I want to take a look at TCU women's basketball, because TCU women's basketball, to me, suffered a loss that when you get the pieces together, reads like a loss, right? Like there's typical things that happen in a victory. There's, okay, you did this, you check that, you probably won. But there's also things that happen in losses that it happens. You're like, oh, check that. Oh, yeah, you probably lost. You probably lost that game, right? And TCU did the things that, quite frankly, lead to losing. They lead to losing. One of the things that I highlighted from the very beginning of this game was TCU needed to protect the ball. TCU needed to watch out for turnovers. That was the one thing that I always talked about. It was the one thing that I laid out. And it's one thing that they did not accomplish. TCU had 20 turnovers in the game. Now, if you reflect back on yesterday's episode, one of the things that I talked about was, or one of the biggest thing I talked about actually, was that TCU has had trouble with turnovers lately. And you saw that again. You saw it again where TCU's women's basketball team had double-digit turnovers in the first half. I think they had like 12 in the first half or something like that. And then they ended up with 20. And that may sound like, oh, well, you improved between halves. But at the same time, not really. Like, it's not really an improvement to champion. You struggled in a large way in that. And it led to multiple fast breaks. It led to a lot of points in transition. That's one thing that I always mention. I said, look, it's not just that you turn over the ball and you're taking points away from yourself. Sometimes that's what happens. But also, because like you had travels and things of that nature, right? Yeah. So you took the points away from you. but steals happened. And Ohio State was pushing it. Ohio State was pushing it on Monday. So Ohio State was able to play fast when there weren't turnovers, but when there were turnovers, they were getting down the court expeditiously. It took no time for them to get down there. And that, to me, was a big part of their second half, where Ohio State scored 25 in the second quarter. I think they scored 25 points in that second quarter. Meanwhile, TCU scored 18. So it's still not a bad quarter at all, right? Yeah, 18 and 25. It's not a bad quarter at all. But a lot of the points, it felt like, came off of turnovers. A lot of the points felt like you were causing, or you were having mistakes, some forced, some unforced, some forced and some unforced. But you were having mistakes, and they led to points from Ohio State. That's what it felt like. Remember, I told you this is one of the best teams in the country in getting steals. They averaged 13 and a half steals a game, or they did coming into this game at least. You look at today, or yesterday rather, they ended up with, where the steals at? 9. So, I mean, a little decent, but still not good enough in the long picture, or in the big picture of it all. So that's one thing that TCU did that just absolutely will not lead to victories. I thought you needed a 13, 14, maybe 15 turnover game, but you got 20 in that. You're just not going to beat this team a lot. And I think I'll get to this in the end, actually. The other thing that you did that isn't going to lead to victories is Marta Suarez having 2 points. Marta Suarez did not have a good game against Ohio State. She ended with 2 points on 1 of 6 shooting. She was 0 of 4 from 3-point, and it felt like a lot of those misses were ugly too. It just felt like she was off. Shooting the ball, she was completely off. There was no rhythm to it. There was no easy shots. The shots that were kind of open still missed. It wasn't easy offense for her. And additionally, she had 9 turnovers. TCU had 20 as a team. Marta Suarez had 9 of the 20 turnovers versus Ohio State. Not a recipe for success. It just isn't. And this is your second best scorer. You can't go in and have, against a team like Ohio State, you don't ever want Suarez to have 2 points. But I don't think you can afford it against a team like Ohio State. I thought that on the broadcast, they did a really good job detailing what type of game this was. It's a neutral site game against 2 teams that are going to be in the tournament, 2 teams that are fighting to be a top 10 squad. TCU was, they probably won't be after this, but they were a top 10 squad, and Ohio State wasn't, but they actually may be top 10 after knocking off TCU. I thought they did a wonderful job detailing how this felt like a March Madness type of game. And if you use that framework, if you put it underneath that umbrella and you start talking about what TCU did versus Ohio State, you realize you're not going to win games like that. If I asked you, with 20 turnovers, do you think that this team won or lost in March Madness? Let's just say second, third round on, right? Like, let's not say you're going against a 16, 15, 14 seed, whatever. Second or third round on, 20 turnovers. Do you think that you're going to win that game? The answer should be a loud and quick no. If your second best scorer has only 2 points, do you think that you win this game in the second, third, fourth round, whatever, of March Madness? The answer should be a resounding no. The thing is, when you start playing teams like Ohio State, you're going to need your top players to stand up, and you're going to need your role players to stand up. You're going to need people who aren't your 1 and 2 to stand up. So when Taylor Bigby gives you 4 3-pointers in the game, when she gives you 14 points, that's supposed to be good. That's supposed to be solid. You're supposed to be able to get by with that. Clara Silva gave you 12 again, had just short of a double-double. But you're supposed to be solid with that. Sheffy comes in and gives you 9 points, right? Like, you're supposed to be solid with that. Except it's supposed to be paired with Marta Suarez having a certain performance. And she didn't have that performance. She just didn't. So when you look at it, TCU lost by 3 points, or 2 points rather. Also, I thought that was a 3-pointer. That was a foul. We'll get to that in a second. But TCU lost by 2 points to Ohio State, a team that's really good, a team that has gone at it with the top teams in the country, right? TCU lost to a top 15 ranked opponent in a game in which their second best scorer only gave you 2 points, gave you 9 turnovers, more turnovers than shots. You lost to a top 15 ranked team in a game in which you had 20 turnovers. These are things that either you expect to change if they play it again, or things you should focus on cleaning up, like the turnovers. But the reason I bring those two things up is TCU lost to a top 15 team with 20 turnovers and their second best scorer having arguably her worst game of the season. And you only lost by 2 points. You only lost by 2 points. I'm not telling you to be encouraged. I'm saying if these teams played again, TCU probably would not make that level of miscues again. That is what I'm saying. There's no encouragement because unlike the men's team, you expect to be great here. Let's be real about it, right? Expectations are different. Talking points are different. You expect to be great here. And where I was going. Okay, so yes, you expect to be great. And because you expect to be great, you don't take moral victories and things like this. What I'm telling you is in evaluation, if TCU cleans up things by the time March rolls around, they are going to be a force. You should not be encouraged, but you shouldn't be discouraged. That turnover problem needs to be fixed expeditiously. That needs to be fixed because you just simply cannot win big time games having 20 turnovers. And that's something that's been happening. And yes, West Virginia and Ohio State are great at forcing turnovers, but the pressure of Ohio State, I felt like forced a lot of that. And that's something that other teams can replicate. I just thought TCU was slower. Like they usually take advantage of being the bigger team. And I don't think the size is what made them slower, in my opinion. But it just felt like TCU was the slower team. And in the fourth quarter, Jelani Cambridge, who, hey, she probably won't have that type of game again, where she was just slow. She was sluggish the first 3 quarters. But the fourth quarter, she picked it up. So a lot of things would change if these two teams played again. I'm sure that Ohio State has a list of mistakes that they wouldn't make. But Jelani Cambridge was running down the court. Chance Gray was absolutely great early, getting the surge to get Ohio State back in the game and knock down the clutch 3, right? So it was a lot of things that went well for Ohio State, a lot of things that went wrong for TCU. We'll see if these two teams face off, how it happens again. I don't know, can't predict the future, but I can tell you this. If TCU goes into another game in March Madness and has 20 turnovers, they'd be lucky to get out with a win. They'd be lucky. It wouldn't shock me if they lose close like they did today or yesterday, excuse me, but they'd be lucky to win that. Speaking of today, TCU does play Oklahoma State. This is Tuesday night. If they lose this game, I think it's time to start having conversations about whether or not we should pull out. You don't have to sit down, but pull out the hot seat for Jamie Dixon. It's time for that conversation, and I'll have it as we continue with Locked on Horned Frogs. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked on Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. I don't know if Jamie Dixon is on the hot seat yet, but I do not believe that he has a long leash. I think that if he loses to Oklahoma State tonight, the conversation needs to be had about whether or not at least put it in his vicinity. I'm not saying, hey, you lose to Oklahoma State, you sit down on the hot seat. But what I'll say is TCU losing to Oklahoma State tonight, Tuesday night, would probably be a sign of failure that would put his job in jeopardy. That's what I'll say. I try not to be too fast on things. I really do. Because I don't want to say fire the man. I'm not saying fire the man. But hot seat doesn't mean you're fired. Hot seat just means we're watching your job very closely. And that's what I think needs to happen if he loses to Oklahoma State. The reason that's the case is not because that's a team that's just so beneath TS or TCU or anything. Like, it's not that. It's about the fact that you just lost to a Utah who seemingly was beneath you. And now you're spiraling. And let's do a little history. Let's mix history with the present. But first, you must look back. And the reason I look back is to see, what is the reason to give someone a leash? If I have 5 great seasons in a row, I have 1 or 2 bad seasons, I probably still have some rope to go. If you've had a bunch of average seasons and you have 2 back-to-back bad seasons, you're probably getting let go. It's different, and that is an appropriate way to treat it. So what has Jamie Dixon done? And if you're an everydayer, If you haven't realized by now, please know I do love an ongoing storyline. I love something I can check back up on. I can see how it rolls, how it's going, excuse me. And one of those things is Jamie Dixon's conference record. Shout out to Sarah Smith. She'll be back here tomorrow. But one thing she talked about towards the end of 2025, one of those later episodes in December at least, was the track record of Jamie Dixon in conference play. And what she detailed to me was extremely surprising, right? Never having I was going to say disappointing, but it's not disappointing to me. It's just surprising. This is his conference record since coming to TCU. I'm going to read them just straight through. 9-11, 9-9, 9-9, 8-10, 5-11, 7-11, 7-11, 9-9, 6-12. That's not good enough. Never having a winning record in conference play. Yes, he's had some 21 seasons, so like give him that. But you've never had a winning record in conference play, and it doesn't feel like you're on the way to doing that now. You're 1-4. You just lost to Utah. You lose to Oklahoma State. You're looking at 1-5. Depending on what Kansas State does, you could be tied for last place. You're tied for second to last place with a miniature logjam right now, but that's not good enough. That shouldn't be acceptable. And it's not as if the track record is expansive. Yes, you won an NIT nearly a decade ago. I don't want to write off how important of that is. I won't write off how important Jamie Dixon's NIT victory is and how impressive it was year one. I get it. But what I'll say is I will emphasize the timeline. I won't write off the success, but I'll emphasize it's not just a what have you done for me lately league, right? Like it's not just that. You have to go back a few years. You get to go back a few years when you say, what have you done for me lately? So to me, an NIT in 2017 is not enough to say in 2026 that his job should be secure. And if it is, that's a leadership thing. You know, that's how I feel, especially when everything else has been ugly. So you look at the history, but what about the present? And in the present, he's been inconsistent. Yes, you knock off of Florida. You play close against a lot of these top tier teams, whether that's a Michigan, a BYU, an Arizona. You should have beat Kansas. So depending on how you want to look at it, you could either look at it as a choke job or someone who overshot. But like I said yesterday, when you lose to Utah, you start looking at that Kansas game and saying, dang, you did do everything you possibly could, and you still couldn't hold on. I won't tell you who they're closer to, but you better hope it's in the middle. I won't tell you they're closer to Utah or BYU or Arizona, right? But you better hope they're in the middle of that Utah and Arizona versus BYU area, right? Arizona and BYU are in one section. Utah is on the other. TCU better hope they're in the middle because that's the best thing that they could hope for. They're definitely not closer to the top tier teams. Inconsistency. You lose to a Utah, you lose to a UNO, but you play competitive against these teams. You beat a Wisconsin to win a tournament championship. So, like, to me, it's very difficult to say great season going on because you've dealt with heartbreak. You've dealt with poor performances. You dealt with the lack of ability in closing, right? Like, these are traits that should fall on coaching. They should. Like, the fact that you can't finish is a coaching thing. It's not anything else. That is a coaching thing. So you're currently 1-4 in conference play. Still got UH on the horizon. Still got Texas Tech. Still got Iowa State, right? Like, these are big time games. What is telling me that they're going to suddenly hit a switch and go on a run and have a winning record? They just haven't done it consistently enough. They haven't shown me anything to make me confident. And if the results go the way I think they will, and especially if you lose to Oklahoma State, the results going the way I think they will, I think are very likely. They become even more likely. Okay, you're not just going to lose the games that you're supposed to lose. You're going to lose some of the toss-up too, and you probably lose more of the toss-ups than you would like. Well, the question becomes, when it's all said and done, is this enough for Jamie Dixon to save his job? Lose to Oklahoma State, I'm at least pulling out the hot seat. And you probably going to have to sit on it. In the meantime, in between time, until next time we hear to the family, I'm just saying, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.